Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Hire and Fire podcast. I am your friendly host, Jeremy Miller. I run this show here at Pirate Consulting, which, not shockingly, is your key sponsor of said episode. And along with me is my co-host, Amanda Anderson. Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. Thank you.
We are going to start a brand new topic today. We're not quite sure if it's going to take an episode or 2 episodes. We shall see. But today is going to be focused on job descriptions. We've talked about this a lot in the past. We're kind of running through our typical cycle of going through industry topics, industry skill sets, and then some kind of leadership type skills. We've done a lot of those different types of series per se. This could turn into one of them. I guess we'll see. But this is a loaded topic on job descriptions. So we got a lot of stuff we're going to dive into, but everybody has an opinion. Mm-hmm. Everyone's experienced a lot of different sides of these, of like what it's like to be a job seeker looking at these job descriptions. In our industry, on the staffing side, what the heck is it like being a vendor trying to support a Fortune 500 company, or frankly, any size company, on what their job descriptions look like? And how the hell we manage all of this stuff in order to make it happen.
How to do it as an actual hiring manager. I've been on that side of having to write these and being lost and frustrated.
Right. So we'll do plenty of bitching and complaining about job descriptions today. And you can join in the fun at any time you wish.
We're all fired up today.
Please do consider interfacing with us on any of the channels available, whether it be our website at pirateconsulting.com. Take a look at some of the show notes that we have on either Apple or Stitcher or SoundCloud or all the other services of podcasting that we make these shows available to. Or hit us up on the socials of the world. The Snapchats, the Twitters, the Instagrams, and all the list goes on, where all those kids are hanging at nowadays.
Oh, you're sounding old.
I know, totally. Get off my lawn. I know that is me a little bit, but nonetheless, we do love sharing this stuff with you, and it's really fun to engage with people as they're either agreeing or disagreeing with us. And then in addition, these are topics that we talk about kind of generically inside of our 4 walls, but this effort to build a show for you guys is really just a way for us to sit down and really put pen to paper on what the heck is wrong, how we would recommend doing it. And we bring a few different vantage points, right? Like, I've been in the staffing industry for quite a while. Amanda's been more on the marketing side, and as a manager brings different vantage points. So we get to do a little compare and contrast. We have a bunch of what we call best practices in regards to different things that you could try and hammer into job descriptions. What we're really going to focus on is what the dang problem is. There's 3 basic areas about where we feel main issues of job descriptions fall into. So we're going to break down those 3 areas and then take the individual components of job descriptions, whether it be like the titles or number of needs for qualifications or the information on the company, and then say, okay, where do these individual items of job descriptions fit into what seems to be the 3 main problems with job descriptions as a whole. So maybe, if you don't mind, Amanda, you could just kind of sum up those A, B, and C there on what the heck are the problems. It's listed right there in front of you on the top. Okay, I'll cheat sheet for you.
Yeah, I don't have them.
It was the notes that I put together most recently. So what is the problem? Well, there's 3 different areas. Job descriptions are either not clear, job descriptions are too long, and job descriptions are prone to bias. Those are the 3 issues that we're trying to tackle. So where are they not clear? Where are they too long? And where are they prone to bias? And then we're going to kind of break down those 3 systematically and talk about the individual components and where they fit in those 3 problems, and then kind of talk a little bit about how we could potentially help those efforts or what you could do to fix them. Mm-hmm. We got some other things that we can discuss as well, but those are kind of our main basic breakdowns. Other than that, I am ready to jump in. Are you ready?
Let's do this.
All right. So let's go with the job descriptions are not clear. we have multiple different areas. Let's see if I put a little bulleted list on it. It turns out to be 6 different areas the job descriptions are just flat out not clear. And the first one that we listed, and again, in no particular order, are job titles.
Ah, yes.
I have a love-hate relationship with job titles personally. How do you view them? Are they normally pretty straightforward to you? How do you view job titles in general?
I would say that they are not very clear, or at least I would say that people use things generically and they're not actually descriptive of what you would do. So I think and we've talked about this before, where it's like developer number 3.
Yeah. My favorite example was the technical analyst level 9 of what the hell that title means.
Made it to level 9 though. Level up.
Yeah, so basically the problem is a few things. We broke out the titles, meaning what accurately describes titles. So things like junior, mid, senior, lead. And then we have the other dynamic of how the title itself might make sense to the company, but makes sense to no one else.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the technical analyst level 9.
That's the one that I'm more familiar with in my previous role. We had just internal names for things that made sense to us and what we do, but someone that was searching for a job would never search for that particular title. So that's where we would actually list online the title people would search for. It was a little bit of our SEO coming out of, what do people search for? And then when they came in, be like, well, this would be what your internal title would be.
Yes. And that's brilliant. That's really the right school of thought. But you guys are a little ahead of the curve on the thought process, because all you do all day is try and think about how your message would be received.
Correct.
Right?
Or not even how received, but how people search. That was our whole, that's half of what I do here, of trying to figure out, well, what would people search for and how do I tailor the content or for this job description so that we show up, we even, get in the game, basically.
Yeah.
And so
that's kind of where the technical analyst 9 comes from. Most recently here internally, we had a job title that was labeled SE3.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody knows what the hell that means and or would be searching for it. But, in that regard, going off memory, I think it was a software engineer 3. And internally, they called it an SE3. Makes sense, not complicated. But clearly that title in and of itself is either general, vague, or doesn't really describe what's happening. So what we do internally here when we're working on positions for our clients is we try and respect a little bit of both, which is kind of what you alluded to, right? Like, all right, so we know this is what the actual title is internally for our client, or in your example from your previous employer, but here's exactly what they would be looking for. Right. And in that example, an SE3, a software engineer 3, we actually figured out is a mid-level business analyst that has the ability to do some light development, specifically surrounding a Microsoft Dynamics project.
That's fantastic.
As you can guess,
that's fantastic.
SE3 did not match exactly what they were really looking for.
Correct.
Yes.
That was their internal just coding for it.
So totally cool. So we would argue the right way to tackle that would be to utilize both. Right? I would recommend utilizing the title that actually describes the job. In this regard, a mid-level business analyst with experience including A, B, and C. And then maybe in the description itself, maybe under where you would put even company information. Internally,
your internal job title would be blank.
Yes.
And this means, or whatever, because you can't use that as the job title for people to search. You won't show up when they're searching for you, and you won't get enough applicants.
And we get into this debate with our job seekers as well, because they understandably, frankly, get twisted on how to describe themselves when their organization calls them a technical analyst 9 or an SE3.
Correct. So you don't have to keep that title, everyone.
Right, but everyone thinks you do,
and
I understand why, because their concern is that if they call themselves something different and maybe a reference is done, that if they're calling themselves a Dynamics developer or, whatever.
Correct, yeah.
But they get a reference done and their now ex-employer says, well, actually, no, this person wasn't a developer in a Dynamics group. This person was an SE3. That they, as a job seeker, will be deemed as misrepresenting or maybe even flat out lying. And we try and help people overcome that.
Because people aren't
because they don't think that way. No.
Literally, when they do background checks with previous employers, I believe the only legal thing they can ask is dates of employment.
Basically.
Anything above and beyond that they could get in trouble for. Because
Yeah.
I know in our my previous employment, they would not say anything above and beyond that.
Yeah, and most companies have, not most, but quite a few have a very hard line stance on if they're going to give out references, what information they'll give out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could even, if you're worried about that, you could write under your title, whatever you call yourself of what you actually are. Let's say you're a Dynamics developer. That's what you did. You could underneath it say internal title was SE3.
Yeah, and that could
if you're really worried about it.
And that could be your first bullet point. I was hired as an software engineer level 3, but my specific duties are including A, B, and C, which can be more accurately summed up as insert the title that you choose.
Correct.
You want, as a job seeker, you want the titles, and we went over this in detail on our resume show.
Correct, yep.
But you want your resume job titles to do a combination of two things: accurately describe who you are and what you do, and ideally help sell you into the role that you're looking to get, whether that be a more senior job or a promotion opportunity or whatever.
We've had a situation recently where someone was they were something higher, like a global operation. It was like an operations manager of some sort, and they were looking to be just a lower level manager at another place. And we were talking about how they should switch that title because it's a small company and it really made it seem more than what it actually was. Like you can be a director of one, or you could be a director of 500.
Correct.
So those are very different positions, and I think you could adjust those titles accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, we could go nuts on this, but there are organizations out there that for whatever reason have a lot of VPs. Mm-hmm. So in one organization, a VP is equivalent to a senior director in another environment or whatnot. So there's a lot of factors to consider, but from a job description perspective, what we're trying to key in on is that not only do you want applicants to be able to find you by searching similar titles to what you're looking for, but also you want the job to be accurately kind of labeled per se.
Correct.
So that when people read it, they understand what the heck is being looked for.
Well, because in all honesty, people, and this will go into play with the whole podcast today of everything we talk about, but applicants spend about 50 seconds looking at a job description before deciding to apply.
Man, I believe that.
So you, with everything that we talk about today, keep that in mind of like, you have less than 1 minute to get them to feel confident in applying.
Yeah.
So if they don't understand the job description, you've already kind of lost them.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. So the same thing can be said for the seniority of the title. So I put a few things in here in notes like junior, mid, senior, lead, manager, director. Those can be really cool, not only accurate descriptive titles, especially if it was a manager or director, but maybe even more importantly, if it's not, how do you accurately describe it? Entry level, junior, mid, senior, lead. Those are the most common 5, let's just call it descriptive words to describe the seniority of a position. We are of the opinion when it comes to job descriptions, if you want to use the word entry level, that literally means entry level. So
like zero years,
to what?
0 to 1 max.
0 to 1 is kind of where it is, right? Junior could be described and be viewed as analogous, but junior automatically implies that you have at least something. You have some type of experience.
I would say that's 1+, you know, 1 to whatever the next section is.
Maybe 1 to 3.
I was thinking 1 to 3.
Yeah. The mid-levels are typically more in the 2 to 4. Maybe 2 to 5.
I was going to say 2 to 5 would be my guess.
Senior level, we tend to see 2 different types of senior, either 5+ or kind of 8+.
Okay.
Senior level, in my opinion, is almost always generically described as 5+ years of experience. But senior could be more than that, whether it be 8 years, 10 years, and we do see some of that. Lead titles are kind of synonymous with senior, but lead tends to imply that you are either the go-to resource or you are the right-hand man to the supervisor or manager of the department. Lead typically does have a connotation of not necessarily people management,
right,
but a level of proficiency that would be the go-to resource in the group.
Almost like a subject matter expert.
Exactly.
A SME, if you will.
A SME, yeah, if you're
that.
not familiar with those. The same thing has to do in IT, that is, with what I generically call admin, engineer, and architect debates.
Which I'm not haven't been familiar with. So it's kind of interesting to hear you guys. It is interesting to hear you guys go through those and adjust those based on the experience.
Yeah, because an administrator, regardless of what side of IT it is, basically just implies that your day-to-day duties are fixing, ensuring that things are running properly, just kind of a day-to-day keeping the lights on type of mentality, administrator, whatever that may be. The engineer component typically refers to a higher level than admin because it's implying that you are either building new technology, implementing new technology, and a lot of times, especially in the larger companies, once something has been quote unquote engineered and implemented, that's when it gets a lot of times handed off to the more administrative types. So the administrator's kind of keeping the lights on, generically speaking. The engineer, generically speaking, is implementing new technology. And then the architect would be the one designing that new technology. So the architect might be personally designing it or utilizing a team to design it. The engineers might be the ones building what the architects designed, or the engineers might be the one implementing the architect and designed new technology. Does that make sense?
So would you call it the architect will decide what to do, the engineer will decide how to do it, and the administrators will do it?
Generically.
Yeah,
generic. Obviously, there's a lot of leeway there, depending upon what an architect does. Obviously, these titles can blend together. So you might have an administrator that's doing engineering duties, or you might have an engineer that's doing architectural duties, or you might have an architect that built the damn thing, but they're also the ones implementing it the way maybe an engineer would. So again, there's not hard, fast rules, but normally these titles have a connotation to them. Yeah. And you'll notice if you're talking to prospective candidates for these roles, they tend to really like these titles. It matters to them. An architect wants to be an architect, and they deem an engineer to be a little below them maybe. But our job is to kind of disseminate this, and then we try and partner with our clients, of course, to understand. So what we end up doing is we take these job descriptions, we take the information from the client and the decision makers on what they're looking for, and then we try and utilize those titles as the way to kind of weed through candidates. And then we can help the candidates understand if they are misquantifying themselves.
Right.
If they're calling themselves an architect when they shouldn't be.
Or an administrator when they're more. Or an engineer when they should be an architect. I could see that if you're not super familiar with the hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, we had a senior support administrator role recently that was paying up to $130. And by default, that support component puts it into an administrative type role. Not administrator like you're pushing paper.
Sure.
But you're the one
You're
supporting this
administering.
day to day. Correct. You're administering this process. And that title alone would have chased off some engineers, and or that salary alone might be really attractive to an administrator, quote unquote, but they might not be senior level enough for that,
to handle
right?
it. Yeah.
So the titles themselves matter, and we very well understand that everybody in this equation has a different motivating factors or different pieces of information that are being thrusted upon them, whether it be a manager being given this title from HR or what have you. So we get it. It's a little confusing, but nonetheless, the job description needs to be more clear in regards to titles. And titles themselves are one of those areas where job descriptions get fuzzy and gray really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's where you can lose people. Another item of job descriptions not being clear is the location. Location. This one is a COVID fallout. I mean, that's really what's happening here.
Because this was never an issue before, because you always assumed that it was in office.
Yeah.
So it was never needed to be on the job description of where is this located?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
It's located in Minneapolis or Salt Lake City or wherever.
That's where it is.
And that's where it is. And we've had some really interesting situations with this. Like, for example, we have a few clients that historically have hired people to work remote. But those people working remote were only hired out of the markets where they had physical offices.
Sure.
Now, all of a sudden with COVID, they're realizing, well, wait a second, we can hire people anywhere, but our corporate office is telling us we can only hire people in these 9 states.
So remote, yet.
But
only certain states.
Yeah. So you can be 100% remote, but if you live in New York, all of a sudden we can't hire you anymore.
That's funny.
Which is a weird new dynamic, right?
Yeah.
So clients, from our perspective, definitely get a pass on this area because it's a new, ever-evolving situation.
Well, and what's interesting is you have people on both sides of the fence. So you could be offering an in-office job and people want to be remote, your people, or you could say, yep, we're fully remote, but you've got a bunch of people who go, we would like to be in the office.
Yeah.
We work better as a team in the office. We
Sure.
miss that. So I think that's a tightrope to walk regardless of whether you're doing a hybrid, a remote, or in office. You're always going to have people who want something different.
Yeah, and we're basically internally to Pyra, we quantify them as either a local role where the position needs to be filled in that particular market and requires the person to be in the office either exclusively or repetitively, whatever that might be. Partially is probably a better word. We've since COVID started been allowing a new category that we just refer to as temporarily remote. And that's kind of a COVID adjustment that this has always been an in the office job. By all accounts, it probably will be again, but temporarily it's remote, whatever that looks like. Then we have the remote jobs that are just true work from home, whether they have been or they will be or are temporarily. It doesn't matter. Like, this is considered a remote job. And that's where we can run into those, can you hire this person who works in this state? Which is really just a challenge of insurance, taxes, etc., which we understand. And then we do have some jobs that we just generically call hybrid, where it is a flexible schedule, but they need you to be able to be both, whatever that is. We need you in the office once a quarter. So maybe it's a travel situation, or you have a specific schedule that allows you to be remote on either certain numbers of days per week or a certain day per week or whatever that looks like. That's a challenge. We get it. But nonetheless, this matters now.
Right.
Because if you're going to be posting a job that's exclusively remote, but you can only hire people in 5 or 6 different states, you need that as clear as possible.
You have to have that on the job description.
Yeah.
Because, and there's plenty of people who are looking for exclusively remote positions. So, yeah, you want to make sure that that's quite clear. Location is now very important to have on that job description.
Yeah, so what we started doing was once we ran into these issues with customers, we would obviously get the list of states, and on any position that we publish, those states are labeled very clearly, ideally like red, italicized, bolded, or both, so that people can see that. Most job boards, if you're posting there, might have the ability to customize which markets you could receive people from, but nonetheless, that's a good idea just to have that listed specifically. So the location itself is something that matters now more so than ever, and just understand that, there are a few different varieties of these, and the clearer you can make it, the better. We're going to have problems for the next few years on organizations that want people internally to be working at the office and how they retain people or attract people. Because if your company wants to make you come back into the office, there are endless amounts of options of companies that aren't going to make you do that.
Right.
So that'll be really interesting to see how those organizations compete for talent when they could be losing people to remote positions just because that's the way it works.
You could very much, because people are very, I think, on one side or the other, that you're going to have basically in-office companies and remote companies. And eventually, I feel like eventually that's the way it's going to go.
Or departments, yeah.
Or specific teams.
Right.
Okay, well, yeah, our appointment schedulers can be remote.
Right.
But our creative needs to be in office.
Right.
Because that works better.
Exactly.
So I could see that.
Right. So how do you go about that? I run two different types of teams of recruiters here for Pirate Consulting, and one of our teams is in the office, and they have the ability to either be flexible with their schedule or earn more flexibility. But separate from that, I have a team that's exclusively remote. Mm-hmm. So I can tell pretty quickly when I talk to candidates which one's going to be a better fit for them, because like you said, some people love being in the office and an equal number of people don't want to be ever.
Correct.
And that can be okay.
And then you got me, and I like the hybrid.
A little bit of hybrid.
I like a little bit of both.
I'm kind of a hybrid person myself.
Yep.
And I struggle with that just like maybe everybody does on when you're in the office, how much you're in the office, so that is an area of job descriptions that never really used to be an area that was vague and gray and unclear, but has become so. Mm-hmm. So that's a way that companies can improve on their job descriptions. Item number 3 for how things are not clear is the damn pay rate.
Yes.
This sucks because, how do I word this? Both sides like to play coy, right?
Right.
Candidates don't really want to show their number until they understand if they're underselling themselves.
Yeah. It's a little bit of, I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Kinda. It's a little middle school spin the bottle. Is that what you're implying? My mind went dirty on that. So... it's a legit challenge, right? So we do permanent and contract-based staffing. So if we are, for example, when we are selling our job descriptions online, if it's a contract-based assignment, we don't quote a lot of pay rates because that number can vary a lot. But if it's a permanent position, we normally know what our clients are limited to. Well, and we want to put that number if we can.
I would say we are doing that a lot more than we did even a year ago.
Yeah.
Partly, I think I've pushed you guys a little bit on it. And 2, I think we've just read enough and realized enough that applicants want to know.
Well, and because of the market right now, we, as in Pirate Consulting, are struggling a little bit because our clients are adjusting to this on the fly as well. They had a preconceived notion or a preset budget on what salary ranges should be for each individual role, but the market itself is really pushing those boundaries.
Right.
So we'll have occasions where our clients will tell us, and what they feel is honest, by saying, we're open to market rates for this job. And then when we submit people at quote
market
rates, it's becoming a problem. This is not the time to be lowballing candidates. It's just not. But I understand companies have limitations.
Well, and if you have those limitations, that's when you need to start looking at some other stuff, like what kind of bennies can you get?
Yeah.
What kind of benefits can you beef up? I forget who, if it was Brett or someone that was here, said it's going to go back to what it was like in the 90s, where benefits were through the roof because it was such a candidate market that they couldn't raise the prices anymore for rates, but they would entice people with additional benefits.
We're getting really close.
We're getting
close. If we're not there yet,
because
I know.
We're going to be to the point where we're going to have to start asking our clients to give us that list of benefits, and then, okay, what else are you going to throw on in the honeypot to entice people? Right.
So we get it that you guys, and by you guys, I mean clients, hiring managers, etc. Like you have constraints, you have budgets, you all that good stuff. And you'd like to be able to see what talent is available and whether or not they match that. But that's very different than interviewing people that you know are already above your salary requirements. And that's where we've been running into issues where our clients will be open to interviewing people at a variety of rates, but they're not willing to say right out of the gates that they can't afford that. So if we're submitting somebody at 100K, but they know their budget's at 80, well, can you even get to 100? Do you know that you're just going to come in and offer them 85 and it's going to be a mismatch, or whatever the heck the salary is?
Why waste the time? Matter. I don't get that. Why waste the time?
Yeah, so we're having to be a little more stringent on demanding that information up front because it's costing us, in the sense that everybody is running the risk of wasting their time.
And reputation.
Yeah, people are interviewing people that they shouldn't be because they're just too expensive.
Yep.
So what the heck is the hourly rate during the contract going to be? What is the perm conversion salary? What would the salary be up front? What type of benefits are available and come with that? Or what can be used as a negotiating tool?
Signing bonuses.
Signing bonuses are another option.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So
put what you can in there, because the more transparent you are with applicants, honestly, even if it gets you less applicants, you're going to get the right ones.
Yeah.
There's no point in getting 100 resumes when 10 of them are within your budget.
Yeah, and there's a joke basically among the job seeker community of the fact that clients won't mention what their salary is, but they'll immediately demand to know what the candidate's salary desires are. And that just feels adversarial.
It does.
It feels like there's gameplay
because
going
then
on.
You have to basically politely say no.
Yeah.
If you really want to hold your cards to your chest of like, and I think people have found a way to do that, where you can be like, well, it's negotiable.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, I'm really open to hearing what the job offers.
Yeah. And then it turns, but if we're not careful, it turns into a jewelry store where like everything is 40% off at all times. And you're like, well, then why don't you just mark what the price really is?
Correct.
Like, why are we playing a game here? So I can get how people get frustrated by that. But there's just a level of being honest about it up front.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move these around a little bit. Another item for where job descriptions are not clear is the technical specificity. Now, this is related to what we do in the information technology staffing, but as a general rule, I think it applies to any job of any kind, any seniority, any skill set, any industry, of being specific on what you require, what you don't require. How do you label required versus preferred?
The language you use.
Yeah. Do you label every damn technology or every software platform on the job description? Or how do you sum that up so that it doesn't look like a laundry list of requireds?
Which we have seen.
I know.
Now, again, for people who listen regularly, my background is marketing. So a year and a half ago when I started, I would look at these job descriptions and be like, do you ever find anyone that has all of these? And they're like, no. Like that. And it's become so ridiculous that now there's article after article out there recommending applicants apply if they hit 50% or more. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, now we're just playing this weird game. Mm-hmm. Like, so then do you put everything in the kitchen sink ins because they're only going to have 50% of them? Well, that's stupid.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
And, how recently was this updated as well? What if this job description was updated in a really good way 3-4 years ago? Well, is that still accurate?
Well, because I would imagine the job has evolved, perhaps even simplified and become more niche.
Yeah.
How many of those requirements make up 5% or less of that job? If they're making 5% up or less, get them off there, because at that point, that's such a small area that you could be isolating or kind of deterring really good applicants because they don't have something that's such a tiny piece of the job.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
And I'm really prone to go into the bias component, but we'll try and leave that for later as a little teaser, as well as that's a big component for the bias.
Correct.
Of what's required, who applies, who doesn't, things of that nature. The technical specificity is a challenge because either A, it is way too generic and doesn't include any specifics to help a job seeker or even a staffing organization be able to narrow things down. Or like you said, it includes everything as well as the kitchen sink and is very too specific, therefore running the risk of dissuading people from applying to the job.
Right. Like, do 3 people in the country have all
these? 37 of the items you have listed? Right.
And the experience in your industry and, all the degrees and the certifications and there's 3 people that make that.
Is that what you require? If that's what you require, then let's focus on that. If you don't require it, then you want to be careful not to include language that would convince somebody that you are requiring it, therefore they're not applying.
Because if you look at your list, because we see these jobs, right? They come in and they say, requirements, and you have all these bullets. Well, when I'm looking at them, I would say about 75% of the time, a good portion of those requirements at the end say preferred.
Yeah.
And it was like, so it's not a requirement.
Right.
So that's where, reviewing these job descriptions, when you dust them off from the file folder of 5 years ago, going, are these actually required or are, half of them preferred? And in that case, get them out of that required list because that will deter people for sure.
And you were definitely of the opinion that so I'll word it a different way. A lot of times we see a big bullet list of things and some of them say required and some of them say desired or preferred or what have you.
Nice to have.
Nice to have is another one. Are you of the opinion that you would want to separate those lists? Okay, you are.
100%. They should be separated. The other option for the preferred is to remove it from the job description and make that part of your job interview. Because if it's not required, then don't put it on a job description where they only look at it for 50 seconds.
Yeah.
Make sure that they're looking at what's actually needed. And then when you're in the interview, you can be like, look, we also have some things that would be really nice to have. Tell us about which CRM you're aware of or what additional technologies you know of.
Yeah.
And that can, give you more to talk about that. Maybe you can pull some stuff out of them.
And if you're requiring industry experience, then that would be a hell of a good thing to know for anybody. I mean, really what we're hoping to do is help everybody understand that no job board or no online tool has been able to replace our industry, the staffing industry. And a lot of it has to do with these types of items because people don't know what these clients are looking for. And we do a solid job of kind of, frankly, hammering the hiring manager to get this info out of their head.
And deciphering
decipher through it. Exactly. Now, Amanda was surprised to hear at the beginning when she started here that we don't rewrite job descriptions for anybody ever. We just literally keep it the way it is and summarize the need from there. And frankly, that you could argue is something that we could do a better job at. But if you're on the client side or on the hiring side or both, this is where you can increase the likelihood of people applying. You would rather have HR be overwhelmed with applicants as opposed to we've had one person apply and it's a college graduate and this is an 8+ year job,
right.
That type of thing.
Right.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, if you really don't want to use a staffing agency, I would really listen to some of the stuff you have to say.
Yeah,
you have to do
these
this
job
stuff.
descriptions have to be damn near perfect online, or you're not going to attract the right people. Otherwise, if you are and you're getting some successful hires, then it's a lot of luck to a certain extent that people are seeing it and willing to imply. The problem with job descriptions not being clear is also related to this, is the day-to-day responsibilities.
Yes.
A lot of times those day-to-day responsibilities, frankly, are just flat out missing, or they don't specify how much you're doing of what. And you're a big fan of the percentage basis. You want to explain that?
Yes, absolutely. So especially if you have a lot of, so if you're describing the job on the job description to your applicant, just what are the day-to-day activities and responsibilities? If you only have like 3, I'm less worried about the percentage being there of, what percentage of the day-to-day or job is this bullet point. But if I've seen them where they have 10 or 15, well, if 5 of them at the bottom make up 5% of the job, right? Like on occasion, on the 3rd Tuesday of the 4th month, right? You have to do this responsibility. Like I would list those percentages because again, if someone is maybe a little weak on some of those and it's only a small percentage of the job, that will help them feel confident enough to apply. But not only the percentages, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
No, you're good.
But the verbiage that you use in describing them, I think at some point in the last how many years, call it 10 or 20 years, we've tried to sound
so smart.
And honestly, this happens on resumes too. So this is both sides of the coin here, where we have
proficient in extrapolating the triangular hypotenuse of the right.
And then you go, I don't even know what that sentence says. Right. Like I understand each of the words individually, but collectively it doesn't make sense.
It sounds like jargon, yeah.
Well, and maybe it makes sense internally once you understand the departments and the processes that are, used internally, but you need to write this job description as if you're just having a conversation with the person.
Yeah.
Of you're going to come in and work with this team and, this application and
No, I completely agree.
That's an issue. It's a really big issue.
What I love about the percentage component is even though that can be a little tedious, and I'll admit that, it really does explain to even yourself as the hiring manager of what you need. If 50% of the time they're responding to customer issues, whether it be customer facing in person or over the phone or cleaning out an inbox or whatever that looks like, that clearly is the biggest factor of what that person will be doing on a daily basis or a weekly basis.
Yes.
And then if you have an item that includes basically from your best guess is 7% of their job, maybe you can realize that you've been overemphasizing that requirement of the job.
Or that technology or whatever.
Or maybe somebody could grow into that. Or maybe even though it's only 7% of the job, it's so important that it needs to be keyed in on, and you can at least explain why that is a make or break scenario.
Correct.
Whether
you're the only person here who will be able to do this.
Yes.
So while it is a small percentage of your job, it's the most important.
Yes.
Say that. There's nothing wrong with saying that. In fact, I think that would make people more understanding of what you all have on there as well. If you just everything's equally, it's like saying everything's a fire.
Yeah.
Well, then nothing's a fire.
Right.
So you have to have some kind of a hierarchy to give people an idea of, because maybe, okay, half the job they're mediocre on, but that 7% that's really important, they're an expert on. Well, shoot, like, okay, like maybe that interests them.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I would view this as analogous to a job seeker's bullet points in their job description. So I would argue if you have a job description that has 6 or 7 bullet points describing your role, you would want to put those bullet points in order of what you do the most of, what you're best at, right? That would be an easy, logical layout to sell yourself. And I think the job descriptions could mirror that, or maybe they mirror each other on what seems to be the most.
Because you could do in order of importance and just list that of like job responsibilities in order of importance.
Yes.
Or job responsibilities by percentage of day-to-day activity.
Yes.
And whatever makes sense for your role.
And then for job seekers, a little trick would be is if you're trying to get that next job, whether it's a promotion or the higher level, whatever, if you stack rank your bullet points of what you do on a daily basis, and maybe the least amount of things you do is help lead a team, well, if you're looking for the next job to be a leadership component, you might want to put that bullet point at the top of your job description. It might be the minority of what you do on a daily basis, but that bullet point more effectively sells you into what you want to do next.
Would be the most important one to highlight.
There you go. Exactly. So we're just arguing job descriptions should do something similar on what they would be. I think the percentage breakdown is great.
Mm-hmm.
I laughingly said that my girlfriend was going through this in her place of employment, where they basically tasked her with writing this for them of, okay, lay out all of the different duties that you have and assign a percentage time spent on each. And I'm laughingly watching her do this going like, that's so brilliant. HR is basically outsourcing their job description writing to the people who do the job themselves, which frankly kind of makes sense.
Makes sense. However, be careful because employers, if you do this practice, employees are going to want to make it sound like they do a lot of stuff, right? To justify whether it's their wage, their being able to be remote, whatever it would be, right? They're going to tailor it. So make sure you use that, look at those with a grain of salt and maybe skim or trim things that seem superfluous.
Yes. I mean, if you wanted a system to devise as a corporation to make this process repeatable and as clear as possible ongoing, would be to have your annual review process be summed up with your existing employees in the manner that we're doing it now.
For sure.
They break out their job, they describe what they do, they kind of sell themselves on what they're doing to be able to be reviewed by the company and hope to position themselves for an increase. Then those internal review processes can be used to write the job description for the existing department, right?
That's a really good idea.
And nobody wants to do this. Like, it is tedious. Like, this is not on the, like, I can't wait to go to work to write this stupid shit. I get that.
I've been in this shoe where you have to write it and you can't post it until it's written, and you're just like, I just want to hire someone.
Yeah, so I mean, those are a few things that we kind of summed up as job descriptions are not clear. So those five or six things: titles, locations, pay rates, technical specificity, and then kind of a combination of the overall description of the role and the day-to-day responsibilities with a percentage breakdown. Those are the things that we find most common to be not clear. The next item has to do with items that are just generically, typically too damn long. So these things, you might hear some repeat because these things can fall into certain categories or a few different categories. One of them is the company info. So what we're talking about is just the generic overview of what the company does. And not the easiest thing to do for a lot of people, but we would argue I guess I'm making this up on the fly, but in sales, it's referred to as like your elevator speech.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, how can you describe to a random person on the street what the company does or what you do and try and make it as succinct as possible?
Correct.
We're talking what, 2-3 sentences?
I was going to say 3 sentences.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere in that neighborhood that you should use to spend time in the description describing the company. Then maybe you could use 2 or 3 sentences to describe the department, and then maybe 2 or 3 sentences to describe the job, right?
The only thing I would add to that would be, why us? Why to choose that company of
Good point.
Selling yourself a little bit, especially in this market. If you've got something that is specifically unique and, many of your employees consider a benefit, I would put that on there succinctly. Because of the market being as it is, because there are certain things that especially young applicants are looking for.
Yeah, so company information, how can you gain clarity for job seekers by reading that info, yet not losing them because you have the 50 seconds of time
Correct.
to get
They're
their
scanning.
attention. Yes, they're scanning at best. Yeah.
So you need to be short, direct sentences. It's one of the, I was reading an article that, I'll touch on a little bit more on the bias section, but it was talking about if you're about to use a comma, try and hit a period instead. Like
the old run-on sentence.
Yeah, like or write out what you want to write, and then make it a goal to make it half that.
Yeah.
And what can you get rid of? What's redundant? What's not necessary? How many sentences are run-on? How can you make this more succinct? Correct.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt. So that kind of describes a little bit of the company info. We touched on it a little bit for, again, this issue is job descriptions are too long. So another area is the generic description overview, which is really kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier. It's this hodgepodge put together paragraph of words that really don't mean anything. And it sounds professional, yet has no oomph to it.
Right.
It's almost like somebody was writing this thing like they're in English Comp 101 trying to figure out a way to catch up to a minimum character count for writing a paper.
100%. Or it needs to go through legal, where it's such a legal jargon, where at least it sounds that way of the words that they use in the sentence structure of like, no one talks this way.
Yes.
And that would be, again, for this section and for the next part of the bias part of, you need to write these as if you're talking to the person, more yous and we's and not the third person.
Yeah.
Because no one likes to read in the third person.
So what she's describing is, in this job, you will blank.
Not the ideal candidate.
Yeah, you will be responsible for blank. Joining this team will enable you to get blank.
Yep.
You will help our department and company achieve its goals by doing blank. Like directly tying this to the person.
To be successful, you will need to know how to up. Like, we're just all a bunch of humans. Let's communicate as such.
Yeah, and you can do the desireds and required list doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You are an ideal candidate if you have a minimum of blank. You would be considered what I'm making this up as we go here. You would be considered an extra special candidate if you have blank list of desire. You would be correct. Yeah. So however you want to word that, the yous and the we's can be really cool. It just kind of ropes the job seeker into what they would be doing instead of having to force them to look in the mirror and say, do I fit this or do I not?
And, when we were talking about like that job responsibility that makes up 7% of the job, but is super important because they're the only person in the company that maybe will do it. Say that in normal human terms of exactly what I just said, of like you will be responsible for this. It's a small percentage of your day-to-day activities, but it is vital to have someone at expert level because, we don't have a lot of resources for it.
Yes.
That is you can understand that statement more than if you make it sound super important and technical and scary. Well, maybe someone knows how to do that, but you made it sound super technical and scary and they shied away from it.
Yeah, or maybe since we do a lot of technical staffing, that 95% of the job, they're going to be in their cube or wherever they are, heads down, building something. But the other 5% of the time, they need to be able to handle customer questions. So you can't just have the technical component to do this job. You need to have the interpersonal skills to be able to articulate that to others as well. Mm-hmm. And the right person will want to do that or welcome that. The wrong candidate, which is neither good nor bad, will not be interested in doing that.
Yep.
Or maybe they would only be interested in working with the end customer and they're not strong enough or interested in being the heads down coder or whatever it might be.
Well, and you have people who don't really love to interact as much. But if it's only 5% of their job, they could handle something like that. But if it was 50, they would be like, no way. Yeah, so that's where that percentage on those job responsibilities is super important because of just different types of people will gravitate towards what that makeup is.
Yeah, if you have a level 3 engineer that is supporting the infrastructure side of your IT team, they're not going to want to be taking help desk calls all day long.
No.
But they might need to understand that 4% of the tickets that come in for this department have the necessity to be escalated up to a level 3 person. And you would be that individual that would be handling the escalations from the level 2 support team and knowing that a smidgen of your job is that. And you can decide as a candidate whether that's a good fit for you or not because it was labeled clearly. And you don't walk into the team going, I can't wait to do this stuff, yet you're on the phone all day long supporting customers and you can't even get your job done from your perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. And then be descriptive too in let's use that same example of, some people don't like to be disturbed from what they're doing. So if you have, maybe it's only 4% of those tickets that get escalated, but you need someone who is able to quickly switch from job to responsibility and back again. Put that in there of, when these get escalated, you would need to respond within X amount of time. So being able to switch from task to task throughout the day is also vital to this position.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Again, just talk in normal terms so that people really just understand.
Understand simple language, exactly. In the job descriptions are too long category, we also put things in there again that we touched on, technical specificity and day-to-day responsibilities. Again, we kind of talked about this a bit already, but we can sum it up. Are you too superfluous on what you're including in either of those? Items that, like you said, happen once a quarter on the third Thursday of the third month, right? Mm-hmm. Do you need to write an entire paragraph on that item? Probably not. Does it need to be included? Maybe. That's up to you. Day-to-day responsibilities, right? Breaking that down so that it's digestible. You don't want to read 13-page resumes any more than job seekers can mentally focus on a 3-page job description with 96 bullet points.
Well, think about you have to think about what they're going through, right? You're a job seeker. You're probably stressed or pissed off at your current employer, right? And you're reading job description after job description, and after a while, you are skimming and you are glazed over, and those super long job descriptions look like, well, no, you're just a hard pass on those. So try to think about that, of these people are reading a lot of this stuff, trying to find stuff that they fit with. So make it easy for them to discern that.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we've already covered 2 of the 3. Job descriptions are not clear in multiple areas. Job descriptions are too long in multiple areas. How can we fix that? And then last but not least is job descriptions are prone to bias. And this comes across in a lot of different areas, but we kind of broke out 4 of them. Technical specificity, which is included again regarding bias. Qualifications, basically the number of needs, what is required and what isn't. You talked a little bit about the word and verbiage usage. And then lastly would be kind of the actual diversity and inclusion initiatives. So 3 of these are kind of in a way of like how the description itself can be biased. And then the others can be, all right, specifically how to write job descriptions so that bias is avoided, so that you can specifically hit some of your either diversity or inclusion hiring initiatives, right? So we can kind of break this down any way we want, but I know you did a lot of work on bias in particular regarding job descriptions. Do you have enough to kind of sum up what that means from what you found or what you experienced?
Well, they kind of fit, some of the stuff that I read fit into different areas that we've already talked about. I didn't mention this one. So when we were talking about the too long real quick, if you're wondering about what a good length is, this is an article that is based on, I mean, it's like half a billion job postings.
Wow.
So they have data based on a lot of postings and like how they performed. But they're thinking based on that data, 300 to 660 words total is really an ideal. So if you're looking at, again, you have a 2-page job description, that's not good. But, inversely, 150 words where you're just like, please be able to code, no HTML, CSS, and JavaScript or something, like that's not enough.
Yes.
Right. So there is kind of a sweet spot, just to real quick on the too long section.
And my notes that I have for this show are basically bulleted lists. So, I have about a page and a half worth of bulleted lists. It is size 10 font on Microsoft Word, and it's 472 words. So if you have a job description that is bulleted as opposed to like multiple lengthy paragraphs, that even is a little long compared to what you're describing. Now, what was the range again?
300 to 660.
Okay, so this is kind of right in the middle. I have about a 475 word count in a Word document that is multiple bullet points on each different section. And it's about a page and a half of length.
Which is what they said. They said a page to a page and a half is about what she'd look like. Single spaced, 10 or 12 font. Like, don't go above and beyond that. That's no one's wanting to read or honestly write a term paper. So if you're writing job descriptions and you think this is a massive task, well, don't think of it as a 2 or 3 page thing. Like, honestly, you're looking for a few paragraphs and a few bulleted lists. Be succinct. That's it.
Yeah, because again, what staffing firms like us are doing is we have relationships with candidates, or even candidates that we're finding because we're specifically recruiting and sourcing for these jobs. We are supplying them with the generic job description, but we are utilizing what we know about the client, the hiring manager, the job itself, to kind of give them a summation. So yes, of course, Mr. Candidate, please look at the job description, but based on everything we've done leading up to this, they are looking for this: A, B, C, and D.
Yes.
And we are trying to sum up that sucker into as little amount of space as possible so that a candidate can hopefully be able to very quickly get off the fence, one way or the other. They are either too late or disinterested, or they are very interested and or excited for the job because they feel like they fit.
Yep.
And that's why we tend to gain more interest, because we are taking 2 pages of jargon and summing it up to be more digestible.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what works for us. And I think a good mentality to take into writing a job description is going, okay, how are staffing firms doing it? And then how can we utilize that same thought process to gain more attention?
Yeah.
And maybe it is that. Maybe you write a job description of, in general, this is what we are looking for, and then go into the specificity below that, or whatever way you want to lay it out is good is good for us. But being able to find a way to make it digestible to the people that are looking and seeing whether or not they can be interested or feel like they can do the job. Then you have the components of male, female that we've talked about several times.
Well, and that's where a lot of this article talks about, and it's not a push to do it one way or the other. The data in here is simply just for your information. So if you've got a heavily male development team, and you know that diversity, especially getting women or different races or whatever it is on your team, is important to you for the success of your product or service. If that's what your goal is, of like, we need to find women, okay. Well, there are things that you can do to your job description to make it more friendly, basically, to women, and more likely that they will apply.
Yeah, and in this case, it really comes down to that stat that men will basically apply if they have 50% of the stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And then women are more likely to only apply 100. If it's like 90 to 100.
The data is very clear. Women will only apply to jobs that they feel. You're right. I think they said 100, but even if you go 90 to 100% of the requirements, they just won't apply. And so you're missing out on all of those applicants. And that's why when we were talking about, if it's not required, if it's a nice to have or a preferred or whatever, get that out of there. Because women just won't do it. And not because they don't think they can do the job, but their number one response was, I just didn't think they would hire me unless I had it all. And I didn't want to waste my time. We don't like wasting our time.
Right. And I think men can feel the same way and do feel the same way, but they just don't tend to get hung up on that for whatever reason. So it's specifically, if you have pretty hardcore or even just a goal of having more diversity and inclusion in your groups, whatever way that looks like Amanda said, it could be adding more women to the group. It could be diversifying races. It could be your team is much older and you would like to encourage younger people to apply, or vice versa.
Correct.
It's a very young team and you would love to have folks that are more tenured in their career because you feel like it brings A, B, or C. Whatever the hell your goal is totally fine. It's just understand that the layout of the description, what you do include, what you don't include, is actually either enticing or de-incentivizing people from applying.
Well, and it's a bunch of stuff. I mean, this article is really interesting. And the fact that it was based off so many job descriptions.
500 million descriptions.
The one that I thought was kind of interesting was the type of language that you use. And this isn't a male-female thing. This is just speed to fill. So there's growth-minded language. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it emphasizes the potential to develop your abilities and talent, right? So, and then on the flip side is fixed mind language that stresses skills that are what you would perceive as like unchanging or just inherent. So that's the difference between the two. So this one was saying that job postings that use growth mindset phrases, for instance, opportunity to grow, work hard, persevere, forward thinker, those fill much faster, like 8 days faster. And then if you use 2 or more growth mindset phrases, 11 days faster. Now, on the flip side, then the ones that they say that will slow time to fill are things like high performer, effortlessly, natural ability. Those are the ones that
dissuade people.
Yeah. Like, well, I've never had a job I was effortlessly
at.
But people, they tend to gravitate more towards those growth the growth mindset language
phrases, right?
And so that's an easy fix. I mean, I did it to a job description.
Yeah, we just wrote one internally here the other day.
Yep.
Right?
And all I did was tweak the sentence because now that I know, I wouldn't have thought about this in the past. High performer is a very common, or hit the ground running,
right.
That kind of stuff that will dissuade people. And then I don't know if it was this one or another one, but men are more likely to do those kind of jobs too. The fixed mindset, they are a little more likely.
Yeah. So I mean, most jobs have a combination of the two. So they need somebody who can hit the ground running in certain categories, but they also have a lot of areas that the person will personally benefit from and grow. So it's not normally one or the other. It's a little bit of both, right? So you could use this as a way to describe, okay, here's the areas of minimum levels of experience of this. These are the areas that we would be asking you to hit the ground running, A, B, C, and D. And these
or just call it expert level.
Or expert level.
I would just expert level for these requirements. What do you say? Moderate level or
sure.
What,
yeah.
Something
sure.
like that.
And then helping the job seeker understand that we need you to have certain things that you're bringing to the table, but there are also other areas that you're going to grow a lot in, and you're going to learn a lot, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I would use something like that where you can say like the level of proficiency more so than hit the ground running effortlessly, things like that. Just use it as kind of a sliding scale, like, just basic knowledge of these things, expert level in these. Mm-hmm. That would get you at least some specificity.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's doing any of these items on purpose. It's just we're getting a crap ton of data out from things like these that are not just, hey, we surveyed 11 people.
Right. Which I'm biased against. I'm like,
right. It's,
I need
not enough data.
I need a big sample size.
Yeah, so I mean, whether or not you personally, as a hiring manager, have an emotional connection to diversity and inclusion, whether or not your department or your company is pushing it, this isn't necessarily like this recent buzzword diversity thing. We're kind of utilizing that to describe how these job descriptions can actually help you gain more attention or push people away.
Correct. So one example, so when you look at just the diversity talk of having an EEO statement on your job description, we're not pushing for you to have it or not to have it. Yeah. This would be a situation where if you are trying to hire anyone currently under the age of 35, post-pandemic, it is proven that that is important to them, that you're focused on diversity and inclusion efforts. And so having that language in there, a heartfelt one, though. The data has proven that the generic one, the one that is, what did you say?
ABC company is an equal opportunity employer. Yes. Must be able to lift 50 pounds.
Right. That will actually hurt you more than not including it.
Yeah.
But if you want to attract those 35 or younger and you're doing all the other stuff that we talked about, including an actual heartfelt of like, this is what we're doing and why it's important and, yada, yada, that will help with the younger, because it's definitely a high focus for those younger generations. The data's all over it, where they will leave. I mean, it's to the point where they even want companies that they work for to respond to current events that it's so important to them.
Yeah. Which may or may not fit your company, but nonetheless, you at least know. There was a meme the other day on LinkedIn that I think I saw, and it was basically like, people in my generation don't give a shit about your free beer, unlimited pop, and your workout programs. It's that we want to know that we're valued and you appreciate the fact that we're adults and we have schedules. And that's kind of funny because pre-pandemic, that was the thing. It was like, hey, the more free shit you give to these people, the more likely you're going to attract them.
Fun tech startup, and we got a ping pong table.
We got ping pong, correct. We got beer on tap, the whole thing. And I think the pandemic really twisted people a lot, because now it's like, well, wait a second. I actually like the fact that my job is not sucking my life dry.
Right.
And that I
don't want to play ping pong at work. I want to go home.
Or I want to be able to handle a personal errand during the day and not be treated like I've lost commitment to the job and the company.
You have to take 4 hours of vacation to go to a doctor's appointment.
Correct.
What?
I know for sure. So that continues to be a ever evolving process. And this is where you can insert jokes like fucking millennials and whatnot. We hear you. I agree with you. But
if you want to hire them,
but if that's what you're targeting, that's what needs to be.
Correct.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. All right, so we basically covered everything that we could in a reasonable amount of time. I mean, personally, I feel like we rushed it, but we did the best that we could to cover everything we could about job descriptions in one episode. And we'll continue to circle back on topics like these because we could go nuts on every area of them. But
and I'm sure we'll do some vlogs, and I know we'll put together a blog that'll outline some of this stuff that is shareable and readable and keepable. Yeah.
So take a look at us online if you want some more information. We'll put some cheat notes into the show notes for this episode once it goes live. And we appreciate you listening. Give us some feedback. Take a look at us online, and we will come back again with another episode of the Hire and Fire podcast brought to you by Pirate Consulting. And thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the Hire Fire podcast brought to you by Pirate Consulting. Check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or online at pirateconsulting.com. That's PIRA consulting.com.